You hear crying, a small high-pitched cry, the kind only a child makes when they don't understand what's happening to them. You see a girl in a blue velvet dress sewn with golden fleur-de-lis, a diadem of gold and pearls pressing into her forehead. She is 6 years old. She is being carried in the arms of two French dukes, the Duke of Berry on one side, the Duke of Burgundy on the other, toward a pavilion where a man is waiting. The man is 29. This is what happened to the girl they gave a crown and a set of dolls on the same day. November 1st, 1396. The Church of St. Nicholas in Calais, France. This is not a fairy tale. This is a documented royal wedding, recorded by the chronicler Jean Froissart, who was there, and preserved in the official French inventory of her trousseau, item by item. And this is what we do here. We dig into stories like this one, the ones that got buried under the noise of bigger names and louder wars, and we pull them back into the light. Here's what you need to know before we go any further. First, the girl's jewellery will be stolen, and who takes it will make you sick. Second, she will say no to the most powerful man in England, and she'll be 10 years old when she does it. And third, when they finally open her grave, 215 years later, what they find inside will be stranger than anything in her life. If this is the kind of history that makes you stay, subscribe. Because what happened to Isabella of Valois is one of the cruelest stories medieval England never told. To understand what was done to Isabella, you have to understand why she mattered. By 1396, England and France had been destroying each other for 59 years. The 100 Years' War had gutted both kingdoms. Fields burned, treasuries empty. Richard II of England wanted peace not because he was weak, but because he'd seen what war had cost his grandfather, Edward III. The French king, Charles VI, wanted it too. But Charles had a problem. He was losing his mind, literally. Nigel Saul, in his biography, Richard II, published by Yale University Press in 1997, describes how Charles suffered from episodes of violent psychosis, attacks so severe that during a march near Le Mans in 1392, he turned on his own entourage and killed 4 men. The monk of Saint-Denis, Charles's court chronicler, records that in his worst episodes, he couldn't recognise his own children. So how do you seal a peace treaty between two exhausted kingdoms when one king is intermittently insane? You do what medieval diplomacy always did. You trade a child. Every custody dispute ever written echoes this math. The difference is that in 1396, no one pretended the child's preference mattered. Isabella was born on November 9th, 1389, at the Louvre Palace in Paris. She was the eldest surviving daughter of Charles VI. When English envoys arrived to inspect the prospective bride, they described her as pretty and noted that she told them she was happy to become Queen of England because she'd been told it would make her a great lady. She was 6. She was repeating what adults had coached her to say. Most people who know anything about Richard II remember the weak king deposed by Bolingbroke. What they don't know, what Froissart recorded, and what the official documents confirm, is that for 3 years, this man was the closest thing Isabella had to a father. But we'll get to that. The marriage contract, preserved in the Calendar of Patent Rolls, 1396 to 1399, and analysed in detail by J.J.N. Palmer in England, France and Christendom, reads like a livestock transaction. The dowry was negotiated down to 800,000 francs. Palmer calculates that at contemporary exchange rates, this sum could have funded the English garrison at Calais for over a decade, enough gold coin to fill 2 large wine barrels to the brim. If Isabella died before turning 13, Richard would keep 400,000 francs. If Richard died before she turned 12, she'd receive a dower settlement of 6,000 £666 per year. There were clauses for every scenario: the death of the child, the death of the groom, the dissolution of the marriage. Think about what this means. Two kingdoms sat across a table and put a price tag on every possible way a little girl's life could end. The same civilization that gave us Chaucer, Westminster Abbey, and the foundations of English common law also produced a contract that calculated the cash value of a child's death. Isabella wasn't even unusual. 30 years earlier, another girl, Margaret of Anjou's predecessor Philippa of Lancaster, had been shipped to Portugal at 17 as part of the Treaty of Windsor. She survived. Not all of them did. The papal dispensations of the 14th century list over a dozen permissions for child marriages between ruling houses in the span of 40 years. Requests so routine that the Vatican processed them like invoices. Isabella's contract was crueler than most. But it wasn't stranger than most. That's what makes it worse. And then they packed her trousseau, the official French inventory, still preserved in the Archives Nationales, lists crowns, gold collars, brooches studded with rubies and pearls, silver vessels for her private chapel, and tucked in among the crowns and the gold, her dolls, miniature dolls with tiny silver furniture, a queen's trousseau, a child's toy box in the same shipment. Read that again. They sent a girl to rule a foreign country, and they packed her dolls. But here's what no one expected. Not the French diplomats, not the English lords, not the chroniclers. Richard was kind to her. Froissart, the Flemish chronicler who personally attended the wedding festivities and documented the entire event in his chronicles, records that Richard visited Isabella regularly at Windsor Castle, where she lived with her own small court and a French governess named Margaret de Courcy. He played with her. He entertained her and her ladies-in-waiting with what Froissart describes as humorous conversation. He brought her gifts and toys. Isabella reportedly looked forward to these visits. This wasn't political performance. This was something stranger and sadder. Richard's first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died of plague in 1394. They'd been married for 12 years. They had no children. Anthony Steele, in his 1941 biography, Richard II, published by Cambridge University Press, argues that Richard treated Isabella not as a wife, but as the daughter he and Anne never had. The relationship, Steele writes, resembled that between a father and an adopted child. The marriage was never consummated. Canon law prohibited it before the bride turned 12. Richard never pushed for it. He simply visited a lonely little girl in a big castle, made her laugh, and left. For 3 years, this was Isabella's world. A castle, a governess, a kind man who came to play with her. She had been ripped from her parents, her language, her country. But she had found one person who treated her gently. She attached to him the way any child would. We'll never know for certain what she felt. No letters from Isabella survive. Not a single word she wrote or dictated. And the silence itself tells you something about what a queen's childhood was worth to the men keeping records. Everything we know about her inner life comes from what others observed. That she cried at her wedding, as Froissart noted. That she looked forward to Richard's visits, as the household records suggest. That she loved him. But what happened next took even that away. Spring, 1399. Windsor Castle. Richard visits Isabella one final time before departing for a military campaign in Ireland. Froissart, drawing on accounts from those present, describes the scene. Richard played with her, held her hand, kissed it, and promised he would call for her to join him in Ireland soon. He was lying. His actual plan was to send Margaret de Courcy, Isabella's governess, the last familiar French presence in her life, back to France. He probably never intended to bring Isabella to Ireland, but she didn't know that. She was 9 years old, and the man she trusted most had just promised to come back. He never came back. While Richard was in Ireland, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, exiled, furious and armed, returned to England. Richard had seized Bolingbroke's inheritance after the death of his father, John of Gaunt. Now Bolingbroke wanted it back, and more. Within weeks, England's lords switched sides. Richard's own uncle, Edmund, Duke of York, abandoned him. By August, Richard was captured at Flint Castle. By September, he was forced to abdicate. The chronicler Adam of Usk, who was personally present at the Tower of London during the abdication, records that Richard wept. On October 13, 1399, Henry Bolingbroke was crowned King Henry IV. Richard was sent to Pontefract Castle. He never left. The exact circumstances of Richard's death remain disputed. Adam of Usk wrote that Richard was starved. Thomas Walsingham, in his Historia Anglicana, suggests he refused food voluntarily. The date itself is uncertain, on or around February 14, 1400. What no chronicle disputes is that he was dead, and the 9-year-old girl at Windsor was now a widow. Take a moment to hold that. A 9-year-old, widowed, in a country whose government had just killed the only person who was kind to her. But what no one expected was what happened to her next. Isabella was moved to Sunning, the Bishop of Salisbury's palace on the Thames, a manor surrounded by orchards and water meadows, beautiful and remote. She was 10 years old. She was, technically, the Dowager Queen of England. In practice, she was a prisoner. Here's what Henry IV's government did. They seized Isabella's jewellery, the crowns, the brooches, the gold collars from her trousseau, the gifts she'd received from a French and English nobles at New Year from 1396 to 1399. Jenny Stratford in Richard II and the English Royal Treasure, published by Boydell Press in 2012, documents this seizure, item by item, using the surviving Exchequer records. The jewellery was divided among Henry IV's own children. The inventory, a government document, functions as a receipt for theft. Think about what this means for a 10-year-old. The men who killed the only person who'd been kind to her then walked into her household and took her things and gave them to their own kids. This wasn't war. This wasn't policy. This was theft from a child, performed by a government, documented in official records. Sunning itself was beautiful. Orchards along the Thames, water meadows, bird song, a place designed for bishops to rest in comfort. Isabella was 10, surrounded by beauty she hadn't chosen, in a country she couldn't leave, holding nothing that was hers. And then came the demand. Henry IV wanted Isabella to marry his son, Henry of Monmouth, the future Henry V, the son of the man who had overthrown and likely killed her husband. She was 10. The boy was 13. Isabella refused. We don't have her exact words. Remember, not a single direct record of anything she ever said survives. But the French ambassadorial dispatches of 1400 to 1401, preserved in the Archives Nationales and analysed by Palmer in England, France and Christendom, reveal that Isabella's parents instructed their envoys to confirm that their daughter would not marry anyone Henry recommended, and she didn't. At 10 years old, widowed, stripped of her possessions, held in a country that had just killed her husband, Isabella of Valois said no to the King of England. This was the only act of defiance that mattered. Not the earls who plotted the failed Epiphany Rising, not the French diplomats who sent angry letters. A 10-year-old girl, alone, simply refused. Modern historians have a term for children like Isabella, traded across borders as diplomatic currency, severed from every emotional anchor, belonging to no country and no family. I'd call her what she was, a diplomatic orphan, twice abandoned. First by her father, who sold her for a truce, then by England, which used her, discarded her, and robbed her. In May 1401, after nearly 2 years of negotiations documented in the calendar of patent rolls, a treaty was signed at Lullingham. Henry IV agreed to return Isabella to France. On July 21st, she was handed over at Calais, the same city where she'd been married 5 years earlier, and escorted back to her parents. You might think the story ends here. The girl goes home. The nightmare is over. It wasn't over. Isabella returned to a father who didn't always know who she was. The monk of Saint-Denis records that Charles VI's episodes of psychosis were growing worse and more frequent. Her mother, Isabella of Bavaria, had been managing a crumbling regency. The court was fractured by the violent rivalry between her uncle, Louis, Duke of Orléans, and Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy. The France Isabella came home to was not the France she'd left, but what Isabella came home to was in some ways worse than what she'd left, because at least in England, one person had been kind to her. And then they married her off again. On June 29th, 1406, Isabella, now 16, married her cousin, Charles, Duke of Orléans. He was 11, a 16-year-old widow, former Queen of England, now married to a boy 5 years younger than her. The cycle hadn't broken, it had restarted. A diplomatic orphan, recycled. What they don't show you is what happened in the years after that wedding ended. On September 13th, 1409, Isabella of Valois died in childbirth at Blois. She was 19 years old. Her daughter Jean survived. 19. 13 years of being passed between men and kingdoms, and she never chose any of it. Not one marriage, not one country, not one day. Here's the part that produces the kind of irony only history can write. Henry IV had wanted Isabella to marry his son, the future Henry V. She refused. 11 years later, in 1420, Henry V married Isabella's younger sister, Catherine of Valois. The marriage Isabella rejected was completed anyway, just with a different sister. England got its French bride. The diplomatic machine simply replaced one girl with another. And Isabella's second husband, Charles of Orléans. After the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, he was captured by the English. He spent 25 years as a prisoner. He entered captivity a young husband and emerged an old man, writing poetry in the Tower of London and at various English castles, including Pontefract. The same Pontefract castle where Richard II had died of starvation 15 years earlier. Isabella's first husband died there. Her second husband wrote poems there. In 1624, according to Agnes Strickland's Lives of the Queens of England, compiled from primary French sources in the 1840s, workers at the Abbey of Saint-Lomond in Blois opened a forgotten tomb. Inside, they found a woman's body, wrapped in bands of linen, plated with mercury. A medieval preservation technique Strickland describes as common for high-status burials. It was Isabella. She had been lying there, undisturbed, for over 200 years, forgotten by the country she'd been queen of, forgotten by the country she'd been born in. Strickland records that her remains were moved to the Couvent de Célestin in Paris, the second most important burial site for French royalty. During the French Revolution, the convent was desecrated along with over 40 other royal burial sites. What happened to her bones after that? No record survives to tell us. They packed her dolls with her crowns. They stole her jewellery and gave it to other children. They asked her to marry her husband's killer's son. She said no, the only word of hers that history recorded, and she didn't even get to say it directly. They wanted to give her a crown. They took her childhood, twice. Isabella of Valois was Queen of England for 3 years. She has been forgotten for 6 centuries. The dolls arrived in Calais with the crowns. The girl inside the dress never made it home.